The Great Pyramid has been measured from every angle we know: height, weight, chambers, passages. But this time, the surprise did not come from the stone at all. It came from something moving beneath it. It is known as synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography, the microscopic vibrations measured on the Earth's surface using this tech. When AI stitched together the latest scans, a strange energy pattern appeared in the bedrock, shifting in ways no one had predicted. Scientists rushed to double-check it, and Egyptologists rushed to control the story, turning the Great Pyramid and its bedrock into data. Before artificial intelligence could work on the Great Pyramid of Giza, researchers first turned the entire structure into a three-dimensional block of data. For most of its life, the Great Pyramid looked like a single solid block of stone from the outside, with only a few cramped spaces inside that anyone could actually enter. Early explorers could reach the descending passage, the so-called Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, the King's Chamber, and a rough underground room cut into the limestone below the base. And that was about it. No one could see what was going on inside the bulk of the masonry or in the rock under the pyramid without cutting into it, which was never going to happen on a monument like this. That changed when a group of engineers and physicists decided to treat the pyramid like a giant structure that needed to be inspected the same way you might inspect a bridge or a reactor. In late 2015, Cairo University and a French group called the HIP Institute launched the Scan Pyramids project. Their plan was to cover the pyramid and the rock around it with modern scanners, collect as much data as possible without touching a single block, and turn all of that into one detailed three-dimensional model. To do that, they stacked several tools on top of each other. Cosmic ray moon imaging uses fast, tiny particles that fall from space and pass through stone to show where the stone is thick and where it is empty. Infrared thermal cameras watch how the blocks heat up and cool down to find spots where heat leaks differently from the rest of the face. Ground-penetrating radar sends short radio pulses into the stone and soil and listens for echoes. Ultrasound does something similar with sound waves instead of radio. Electrical resistivity tomography pushes a weak electric current through the rock and measures how easily it moves, which changes if there is a cavity or softer material. Each method alone gives a rough picture, but together they start to draw something much sharper. The most famous breakthrough came from the tiny particles from space. When cosmic rays hit the upper air, they create particles called muons that shoot down through everything below. Rock blocks some of them. Empty space lets more of them through. By counting how many moons arrive from each direction, you can work out whether you are looking through dense stone or a hollow. It is like using rain to sketch the shape of a roof by watching how many drops reach buckets on the floor. The first cavities detected by the Scan Pyramids muography, or empty space behind the chevrons above the Great Pyramid entrance. Scan Pyramids teams put 3 different types of muon detectors in and around the Great Pyramid. Each setup looks at the pyramid from a different angle, but counts the same rain of muons. After months of measuring, the results showed something no one expected. Above the long, steep Grand Gallery, where blocks were supposed to be tightly packed, the muon counts suddenly looked more like counts through open space than solid stone. All 3 detector systems saw the same thing from different directions. A large, empty region with a length of at least about 100 feet and a cross-section similar to the Grand Gallery itself. The team called it the Scan Pyramids Big Void. It was the first major internal structure discovered in the Great Pyramid since the 19th century, and it was found without moving a single stone. The muon maps also showed an odd low-density spot above the original entrance on the north face behind a set of big chevron-shaped blocks. That hint later became known as the North Ace Corridor, a corridor-like space running behind those chevrons near the outside of the pyramid. What makes this kind of work different from older surveys is the amount of data involved. Modern muon imaging does not give a single flat picture. It fills a three-dimensional grid of tiny blocks inside and around the pyramid. One recent muon study of Khufu's pyramid used a grid of about 8 million of these tiny three-dimensional cells, often called voxels, each one holding the estimated density at that point. Every moon that hits a detector is traced back along a straight line through those cells, and the computer updates the counts along that line. Over time, the system records billions of such paths. No human can look at that many numbers by hand and see where the voids and solid lines are. That is where heavy data processing starts to matter. Programs have to clean away noise, search for streaks of slightly lower density that might mean a corridor, and test different internal layouts until the simulated muon counts match the real ones as closely as possible. Researchers now use machine learning methods to sharpen those images and to pull out hidden anomalies that did not match the old design plans. While the muon teams were busy with the inside, another set of groups watched the outer skin of the pyramid. In late 2015, Scan Pyramids teams ran an infrared thermal survey of several pyramids, including Khufu's. They scanned the faces at sunrise as the stone warmed up and at sunset as it cooled down. On the eastern face of the Great Pyramid, they found 3 stones in the lowest row that stayed noticeably warmer than the surrounding blocks. Those spots showed up as bright patches in the thermal images and did not match the expected smooth cooling pattern. The team could not say right away what caused those hot spots. They might mark air spaces behind the face, differences in stone type, or some hidden structural feature. What mattered for the larger project was that each pixel in those thermal images is also a number, a temperature value at a certain point on the face at a certain time. Once you have that, you can plug those numbers into the same three-dimensional model as the muon data and ask simple questions like, which areas of stone heat and cool, as if they are hollow behind the surface, to pin down the shape of the North Ace Corridor and other shallow features. The Scan Pyramids groups turned to tools that work at much shorter range. Ground-penetrating radar was dragged across the chevron zone and nearby areas. Each short radio pulse bounces off changes in material, and the echo times show how deep those changes are. Ultrasound sensors sent sound pulses into the stone and listened for reflections in the same way. Electrical resistivity tomography used lines of electrodes to push small currents into the masonry and the rock, then measured how easily those currents flowed, which changes when the current hits a gap or a crack. Engineers built a three-dimensional computer model of the chevron blocks and the area behind them using detailed surface scans as a frame. Then they loaded the radar echoes, ultrasound travel times, and resistivity readings into that model and adjusted the internal shapes until all 3 data sets agreed. This merged picture confirmed that there really is a corridor-like void behind the chevrons on the north face, and it gave better estimates of its length and slope than muon data alone could do. The same mix of methods has now moved down to the base of the pyramid. A 2025 report from the Scan Pyramids collaboration describes ground-penetrating radar, ultrasound, and resistivity tests along part of the face that looks toward the main approach. These tests found 2 small air-filled cavities only a few feet behind the stone surface at depths of roughly a little under 5 feet and just under 4 tons. Because they sit in the rock right in front of the monument and line up with other architectural features, the team suggested that they might be part of a hidden entrance zone. By now, the Great Pyramid and the limestone it rests on are no longer just shapes on a map. In computer memory, they exist as a dense three-dimensional grid where each tiny block of space can hold several values at once. Estimated density from muons, how it heats and cools from thermal scans, how radar waves bounce there, how electric current flows, and how far the local gravity field bends. Once this full digital pyramid was dropped into field simulation software, some teams noticed something odd under the base. A patch in the rock where the modeled fields kept clustering instead of spreading out. To understand why that patch shows up there, and why people now mention a kind of energy pattern under the Great Pyramid, you have to stop thinking of it as just stone sitting on sand and start seeing it as part of the planet's larger electric skin, the living energy pattern under the pyramid. Over the last few years, a quiet idea from physics labs has begun to gain momentum. A few researchers say the Great Pyramid does something special to invisible waves in the air. When certain kinds of radio waves wash over the stone, the energy does not just pass by and fade. It gathers in a few places, including the rock right under the base. He outlines that the Great Pyramid is actually a coupled oscillator, which transforms vibrations into energy, and that generates power. Watched over time, that shifting pattern starts to look like something alive. An energy pattern is simply the way invisible fields line up in space. When some scientists call a pattern living, they mean it changes when the world around it changes. The Great Pyramid sits in the middle of a constant storm of radio and other electromagnetic waves. These waves are in the same family as light, just with much longer length between each crest. They carry radio broadcasts and static from lightning. The stone does not make these waves. It just stands there while they pass through and around it. The surprising part is that its size, shape, and inner layout can steer a small slice of that energy into certain spots. A key look at this came from a physics study that appeared in the year 2018. A team based at ITMO University in St. Petersburg and a lab in Hanover turned the known size and shape of the Great Pyramid into a computer model. They filled it with average limestone carved in the main rooms, set it on a block of rock that stood in for the plateau, and asked one question. If long radio waves roll past this object, where does the energy go? They focused on waves with lengths between about 200 and about 600 meters, which is between about 650 and about 2,000 feet. That range is much longer than the pyramid is tall. So, these waves act more like a slow tide that washes over the whole structure than like a tight beam that hits one stone. When the team let those waves strike the model from different sides, they found that most of the time the energy simply scattered, but at a few special wavelengths, the pyramid behaved like a tuned body and certain spots lit up. Inside the stone, the model showed stronger fields in three main zones. One was around the king's chamber, another was around the queen's chamber. A third zone sat near the rough-cut chamber in the rock below the center. In these places, the field strength rose above the level in the rest of the block, which means the waves were piling up a bit there instead of just passing by. The team then looked at what happens when you let the pyramid sit on a realistic base. In a second set of runs, they placed the same stone body on top of a layer of limestone that stood in for the bedrock and watched what happened in the rock under the base. For several of the special wavelengths, the model showed that most of the scattered energy did not stay in the air, above, or in the outer stone. It was pushed down into the ground directly under the pyramid. When they drew field maps, the brightest knot of energy sat in the rock under the center line, roughly beneath the lower chamber. The picture also changes once you stop treating the pyramid as a smooth block and remember that it is full of details. The clean computer model used smooth stone and only the major rooms. Other work has shown that the structure has extra hollow spaces, sloping corridors, hidden gaps high above main passages, and shallow gaps in the stone just a few feet behind parts of the casing. From the point of view of radio waves, every hollow space and every sudden change in stone acts like a different material. A narrow tunnel can act like a channel that guides waves from one region to another. A damp patch in the bedrock can let some of the field sink deeper, while a drier patch nearby reflects more of it back up. The end result is that the real energy map in and under the pyramid is a bent version of the simple pattern from the first model, full of extra knots and shadows. That is where heavy computer runs and pattern-finding software come in. Once the three-dimensional model of the stone, the gaps, and the ground is in place, many different mixes of waves can be sent at it in the virtual world. Some runs stand in for distant long-range radio stations. Others stand in for short pulses from nearby transmitters. Some include more moisture in the rock, and others include less. For each case, the computer follows the same field rules and records where the energy is highest in each part of the volume. On its own, that gives a stack of frozen pictures. The real world never sits still, though. The space around the pyramid is soaked with both natural and human-made radio noise. On a global scale, storms send constant lightning pulses. Each flash adds low-frequency energy to the shell between the ground and the thin, charged layer, high up in the sky that we call the ionosphere. On top of that natural hum, people have added layer after layer of their own signals. Long and medium-wave radio bands carry talk and music over long paths. High-frequency bands bounce between the ionosphere and the ground to reach ships, planes, and remote stations. Measurements show that in many places, human-made radio noise is now as strong as the natural background or stronger. In other words, the pyramid spends every hour of every day sitting in a sea of waves that span a wide range of lengths and strengths. At any given moment, only a small slice of that sea will match the special wavelengths where the structure tends to concentrate energy. But because transmitters turn on and off, storms move, and space weather changes, the blend of waves in the air is never exactly the same. When that changing mix of signals hits a fixed shape that has its own favorite ways to ring, the energy map inside and under the stone shifts in time. To move from theory to something you can test, you would need sensors in and under the structure that can feel these changes. A ring of small antennas around the base and a few probes in existing shafts and rooms could listen for tiny swings in field strength over many months. Put together, the readings would form a thick bundle of data that ties the changing outside radio world to the fixed stone shape and the rock below it. This is where artificial intelligence tools come in. Standard field solvers can already predict how waves move through a known shape, but matching those predictions to real noisy long-term readings and finding the stable features inside the noise is hard to do by hand. In many other areas, learning-based programs already clean up messy scans of complex structures and pull out the main shapes hidden inside. The same style of tools is now being pointed at the pyramid problem. Over time, this approach could give a clear picture of the underlying field pattern as something with two sides. One side is fixed and comes from the unchanging shape and materials. The other side is in motion and comes from storms, broadcasts, and other swings in the radio environment. That mix of a stable frame and a restless signal is what turns a dry set of field plots into what is now called a living energy pattern. There is one more twist. The same 2018 study that treated the Great Pyramid as a large-scale wave-focusing body was not meant to power up old myths. It was meant to inspire tiny devices. The team pointed out that you can shrink the same pyramid shape down to the scale of dust-sized grains and use it to build small parts for solar cells and light sensors. At that size, the waves in question are not long-range radio, but visible and near-visible light. Turning the Great Pyramid into a life physics experiment is one thing. Dropping terms like living energy pattern and artificial intelligence into the same breath as Egypt's most famous tomb is something else entirely. And that is where the human panic really begins. Panic, pride, and power struggles around a living pyramid. When it was first announced that scans had picked up a long unknown hollow high inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, the story outside Egypt looked simple. A new hidden space and a lot of excitement. Inside Egypt, it felt very different. Zahi Hawass, former Minister of Antiquities and still the most famous Egyptian archaeologist, told reporters the team had found nothing and that the paper added 0 to Egyptology. He pointed out that large stone buildings always have internal gaps and insisted that only trained Egyptologists could say what really mattered inside the pyramid. The Ministry of Antiquities backed that line with its own statements warning that talk of a new chamber was overblown and stressing that any space still had to be checked, named, and explained by Egypt's own experts. Underneath all that, there was an older wound. For decades, Egyptian scholars have had to push back against outsiders who claim aliens built the pyramids, or that the monuments are secret power plants, or that some lost master race hid its records under the sand. They have worked hard to center a simple story. The Great Pyramid is a royal tomb built by human hands. When the big void news broke, many of them heard the same patterns they knew from bad documentaries, only now tied to a real physics result. Pride, fear of being sidelined, and years of fighting strange theories all mixed together. The mood changed only when one of the strange signals turned into something that everyone could see with their own eyes. In early 2023, a tiny camera was pushed through a narrow crack in the pyramid. On screen, the world saw a clean, unused passage with finished walls and a flat, stone roof, now known as the North Face Corridor. This time, the message from Cairo was warm. Hawass stood in front of the pyramid and called the find one of the most important discoveries of the 21st century. But the deeper problem did not go away. It just shifted. Is the Great Pyramid supposed to stay a finished national symbol? Or is it now also a sort of ancient body that can be scanned, modeled, and used like a piece of lab equipment? Different people inside Egypt answer that question in very different ways. That tension grew even sharper in 2018 when some groups claimed they had found an unusual energy pattern under the Great Pyramid. Old pyramid power ideas slipped straight back into the feed. Fringe channels went even further. They claimed the new work proved that ancient builders had engineered an energy machine on purpose. Animated diagrams showed the pyramids sitting on a bright grid and talked about ancient power networks and lost frequency technology. Others tied the same language to fresh claims about a huge underground city or tunnel network under the Giza Plateau, linked to old stories about a hidden hall of records. For many Egyptologists, this was exactly the trap they had feared. Careful, boring studies of fields around the pyramid were now supplying pictures and phrases that could be dropped straight into the wildest stories on the internet. In their view, every mention of an energy pattern near the pyramid risks being heard not as a dry field map, but as proof of a favorite myth. It is not just about scientific accuracy. It is about years of classroom work, museum labels, and public talks that can be undone by one viral clip. The Egyptian state has had to push back again and again. The Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities issues statements whenever a big claim goes viral, from stories about vast underground cities and beneath the plateau to rumors that famous YouTubers have rented the pyramids like a movie set. In one recent case, a short video of workers removing modern stone and cement around an old electrical system on the Great Pyramid was shared with captions about demolition. Officials had to explain that no ancient blocks were being taken, only ugly additions from the 20th century. There are real legal stakes, too. In the past, Egyptian officials who gave false or misleading public statements about major sites have faced charges of spreading false news. The signal to curators, inspectors, and chefs guards is simple. Talking in public about the pyramids is not just casual speech. In a country where heritage is tied so closely to national pride and tourism money, careless words can end a career. All of this plays out inside a tight management system. The Giza Plateau is a World Heritage Property, and Egypt has created a supreme committee for the management of World Heritage sites to coordinate how such places are run. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.